You know what makes me laugh? When some 25-year-old walks up to me at a Berkshire meeting and asks me for the secret formula to build their first $1 million. They want some hidden strategy, some sophisticated investment technique that only the wealthy know about. And every single time, I want to look them dead in the eye and say, the answer is so embarrassingly simple, it is going to insult your intelligence. That is the real problem right there. People think building wealth requires genius, level intellect. It doesn't. It requires the opposite of stupidity. And most people, despite their impressive degrees and credentials, can't even manage that. Let me tell you something that will save you decades of confusion, frustration, and financial mediocrity. Your first million has almost nothing to do with being smart. I mean it. Some of the dumbest, most financially illiterate decisions I've ever witnessed in my 80-plus years came from people with PhDs, high IQs, and some phase that would make your head spin. Meanwhile, I've watched ordinary folks, people with average intelligence and unglamorous jobs, quietly accumulate seven-figure portfolios by doing a handful of boring things correctly and consistently over time. The difference wasn't brain power. The difference was temperament, discipline, and the ability to avoid being a complete idiot for extended periods. That is it. That is the whole game. Most people lose this game not because they don't know what to do. They lose because they can't stop themselves from doing what they know they shouldn't do. It is psychological, not intellectual. Here is the formula for your first million, and I am going to give it to you in language so plain, so boring, that you'll be disappointed by how unglamorous it sounds. Ready? Here it is. Number 1, spend significantly less than you earn. Not a little less, significantly less. Number 2, invest the difference in low-cost index funds, the S&P 500 total market. Boring as hell. Number 3, do this automatically every single month. Set it and forget it. Number 4, never stop. Not when the market crashes. Not when your buddy tells you about Bitcoin. Never. Number 5, avoid catastrophic mistakes. Don't get divorced 3 times, don't gamble, don't day trade. That is it. That is the entire playbook. 5 simple behaviors repeated for 15, 20, 25 years. No complexity, no secrets. No insider knowledge required. The formula works for almost everyone who actually follows it, but almost nobody follows it. You know why? Because it is boring. It requires patience, and worst of all, it makes you look poor before it makes you rich. People hate all 3 of those things. They want excitement, immediate gratification, and the appearance of success right now. So they chase complicated strategies, hot stock tips, cryptocurrency speculation, and whatever financial nonsense is trending on social media this week. Then they wonder why they're broke at 40. I'll tell you exactly why. Because they refuse to do the simple, boring things that actually work. Now let me destroy a fantasy that ruins most people before they even begin. The fantasy is this: $1 million will make you rich. It'll let you quit your job. It'll fund a life of luxury and leisure. Wrong. Dead wrong. Catastrophically wrong. If that is what you think $1 million does, you are going to be very disappointed when you get there. Let me give you the real mathematics, not the Hollywood version. For decades, financial planners have used what is called the 4% rule. The idea is simple enough, even for the people who failed math class to understand. If you withdraw about 4% of your portfolio annually, and your money is invested sensibly, there is a high probability it'll last 30 years or more. It is not perfect, nothing is, but it is a reasonable framework that most people desperately need because they have no framework at all. So let's apply it. If you have $1 million invested, 4% of that is $40,000 per year. That is $3,330. $3 per month. That is the real, actual, practical meaning of your first million. Not yachts, not mansions, not early retirement in the Bahamas. Just $40,000 annually of relatively reliable passive income. Now, before you get disappointed and close this video, let me explain why this number is actually extraordinarily powerful. $40,000 per year, where you don't answer to anyone, where you are not dependent on a boss, where you can't be fired, where you can't be laid off when the economy shifts. That is freedom, real freedom, not the Hollywood version, the actual version. It means you don't panic when your company announces layoffs. It means you can take career risks without fear of homelessness. It means you negotiate from a position of strength, not desperation. It means you can say no to things that make you miserable, that is worth infinitely more than any luxury car you could buy. But most people completely miss this point because they're so focused on consumption that they fail to recognize the value of independence. They'd rather have a $70,000 car they can barely afford than $40,000 of annual passive income that nobody can take away. That is not financial planning. That is psychological confusion. But here is the part that changes everything, and most people never grasp this. The amount of freedom that $40,000 buys depends entirely on how much you spend. If your lifestyle requires $150,000 annually to maintain, then $1 million is worthless to you. You'll burn through it in a handful of years and end up broke. But if you've learned to live comfortably on $35,000 or $40,000 per year, then $1 million is complete financial independence. You are done. You've won the game. You can tell your boss to go to hell and never look back. This is why your spending habits matter infinitely more than your income. Your lifestyle determines how much wealth you need, and most people inflate their lifestyle so aggressively that they can never accumulate enough to escape. Now that you understand what 1 million actually does for you, let's talk about how to build it. And I am going to be brutally honest about the numbers because most people are living in a complete fantasy world about how wealth accumulation actually works. You cannot negotiate with mathematics. You can lie to yourself about it. You can get angry about it. You can claim it is unfair. But the math doesn't care about your feelings or your excuses. Let's start with the worst case scenario, because that is where most people find themselves. You are starting from zero. No savings, no investments, nothing. You want to reach $1 million in 10 years. How much do you need to invest monthly? Assuming a 10% annual return, which is roughly the long-term stock market average, you'd need to invest about $5,000 to $6,000 every single month. That is $60,000 to $72,000 per year. For most people, that is impossible. But here is the thing. If you are making $150,000 or more annually and living like you make $80,000, it is completely almost nobody making $150,000 lives like they make $80,000. They live like they make $200,000, which is why they stay broke despite high incomes. Let's try a more realistic scenario. You are starting with $100,000 already saved. Maybe you are 30 years old and you've been disciplined for a few years. This changes everything. That $100,000 compounding at 10% for 10 years becomes about $259,000 on its own. Without you adding another penny, that means you only need to contribute enough to build the remaining $741,000. To do that, you need to invest roughly $4,000 monthly, or $48,000 annually. Still aggressive. Still painful, but far more realistic than starting from zero. This is why starting early matters so much. Not because the dollar amounts are huge when you are young, but because time is the most powerful force in compounding. Warren and I figured this out decades ago. We let time do the heavy lifting. Another scenario, you are starting with $250,000 saved. Maybe you are 35 or now the math starts working heavily in your favor. That $250,000 becomes roughly $648,000. in 10 years at 10% returns. You only need to build another 352,000 through contributions. That requires investing about 2,500 to 3,000 monthly, or 30 to 36,000 annually. At this level, reaching $1 million becomes almost inevitable if you just don't screw it up. Do you see the pattern? Your starting point determines your pain level. Start early with something, anything, and compounding does most of the heavy lifting. Start late or start with nothing, and you have to do all the heavy lifting yourself through massive contributions. Most people start late, save little, and then complain that the system is rigged against them. The system isn't rigged. You are just refusing to play by the rules that have always existed. Mathematics is completely neutral. It doesn't care about fairness, feelings, or excuses. Now, let me address the 3 ways people sabotage themselves, even when they understand the mathematics perfectly. First, sabotage. They dramatically underestimate how much they need to save. They think $200 or $300 per month will somehow grow into a fortune over 10 years. It won't. A few hundred monthly might build wealth over 30 or 40 years, but not quickly. If you want your first million in 10 to 15 years, you need to save aggressively, probably 30 to 50% or more of your income. That is uncomfortable. That requires real sacrifice. And most people would rather stay comfortable and poor than uncomfortable and wealthy. Second, sabotage. They expect unrealistic returns. They hear about someone making 20 or 30% on some investment and they think that is normal or achievable. It is not. The average retail investor barely makes 5% annually because they panic, trade too much, and chase performance. They're their own worst enemy. If you want 8 to 10% returns, buy a boring index fund and leave it alone for decades. If you want 15 or 20%, good luck. You are going to need it because you are probably going to lose money trying to beat the market. Warren and I gave up trying to beat the market by huge margins decades ago. We focused on not being stupid and letting compounding do the work. That is it. That is the secret. Third, sabotage. And this is the most common and most destructive. They refuse to increase their savings rate even as their income grows. Someone making $50,000 saves 10%. They get promoted to $80,000 and still save 10%. Then they make $120,000 and still save 10%. Their absolute savings increased, yes, but they wasted the opportunity to dramatically accelerate their timeline by saving 30, 40, 50% of their income. Instead, they inflated their lifestyle and stayed stuck. They went from a modest apartment to a luxury apartment, from an old car to a new car, from cooking at home to eating out constantly. Your savings rate is the single most important variable in building wealth. It is not your investment returns. It is not your salary. It is not luck. It is the percentage of your income that you refuse to spend. If you save 50 to 60% of your income, you can reach financial independence in 10 to 15 years, even with mediocre returns. If you save 5 to 10%, you'll work until you die. The math is crystal clear. Now let's talk about the thing that destroys more wealth than market crashes, bad investments, and recessions combined. I am talking about lifestyle inflation, the silent killer of financial security. This is the disease that infects almost everyone who experiences income growth. And most people don't even realize they have it until it is too late, until they're 55 years old making $200,000 and somehow still living paycheck to paycheck. Here is how it works. You start your career making life is tight. You live in a modest apartment, drive an old car, cook most of your meals, and watch your spending carefully. You are uncomfortable, but you are managing. Then you get a raise. Now you are making $65,000. What do? Do you keep living on $50,000 and bank the extra $15,000? Of course not. You are human. You upgrade. You move to a nicer apartment for an extra $300 monthly. You lease a newer car. You start eating out more. You buy better clothes. You take a vacation you've been putting off. None of these decisions seem unreasonable in isolation. You earn more, so you are entitled to enjoy it a little, right? That is what everyone tells you. Then you get another raise, another upgrade cycle, better apartment, nicer car, more restaurants, more toys. Then 110,000, another round of upgrades. Then 140,000 more upgrades. At every stage of income growth, your spending rises to match or exceed your earnings. You are always living at the edge of your means, sometimes beyond. And here is the devastating part that nobody talks about. Your life gets more expensive, but no more secure. Actually, it gets less secure when you are making 50,000. You were uncomfortable, but you had room to cut back if needed. When you are making 140,000 with a lifestyle calibrated for 150,000, you have zero room to maneuver. You are locked into high fixed costs. If anything goes wrong, a job loss, a pay cut, an unexpected expense, you are in immediate crisis. This is what happened to millions of high earners during every recession. They looked wealthy but were actually fragile. The solution is simple but psychologically difficult. Your lifestyle should lag your income by several years. When you get a raise, don't upgrade immediately. Wait, let the income prove itself. Let the money accumulate. Build reserves first. Only after the new income level is clearly sustainable should you consider modest upgrades. And even then, upgrade well below what you can afford, not up to the edge. This creates automatic wealth accumulation. If you earn 100,000 but live like you earn 70,000, you are saving 30,000 annually without even thinking about it. Do that for 15 years, and you have 450,000 before investment returns. Add in market growth, and you are looking at 700,000 to 800,000 or more. That is most of your first million built not through investment genius, but through the simple discipline of not inflating your lifestyle every time your income increases. But most people can't do this. They can't tolerate looking less successful than their peers. They can't handle driving an older car when their coworker just leased a new one. They can't stand living in a modest home when their friends are. The social pressure to consume is enormous, and most people lack the strength to resist it. They'd rather look rich and be poor than look modest and be wealthy. Now let's talk about the engine that turns your savings into wealth, because this is where people make it way more complicated than it needs to be. And complexity is expensive. The investment strategy for building your first million is so simple that it sounds like I am joking. I am not. Here it is. Buy a low-cost index fund that tracks the S&P 500 or the total stock market. Invest in it automatically every single month. Never sell. Never stop. That is the entire strategy. No stock picking, no market timing, no cryptocurrency gambling, no day trading, no complexity whatsoever. Just automated monthly purchases of index funds for 15, 20, 25 years until you hit your target. Why does this work? Because when you buy a total market index fund, you own a piece of hundreds or thousands of profitable companies simultaneously. You own Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Costco, Johnson & Johnson, and hundreds more. If one company fails, it gets removed and replaced. If one company dominates, its weight in the index increases automatically. You are not predicting anything. You are not betting on specific companies. You are simply owning capitalism itself. And capitalism has been extraordinarily profitable for patient investors for over a century. Not because I say so, but because the data says so. Here is something most people don't know, but should. Over 90% of actively managed funds run by professional investors with teams of analysts, unlimited research budgets, and sophisticated tools underperform a simple S&P 500 index fund over long periods. Think about that. The professionals, the experts, the people who do this for a living. They lose to a strategy so simple a child could implement it. Why? Because investing isn't about intelligence. It is about behavior. The professionals overtrade, panic during downturns, chase performance, and let their egos convince them they can outsmart the market. They can't. And if the professionals can't beat the index, what makes you think you can? The correct answer is you can't, and you shouldn't try. Trying is expensive. The solution is dollar cost averaging, which is just a fancy term for investing the same amount of money on the same schedule regardless of what the market is doing. Market up, you buy. Market down, you buy. Market crashing, you keep buying while everyone else is panicking. This removes all timing decisions. It removes emotion. It removes the temptation to wait for a dip or sell during a crash. It turns investing into a mechanical process that happens automatically. And mechanical processes don't make emotional mistakes. Over time, dollar cost averaging gives you an average purchase price that is almost always better than what emotional investors achieve through trying to time the market. The next critical component is automation. If you depend on willpower and manual decisions every month, you will fail. Guaranteed. Humans are emotional, irrational creatures who make terrible financial decisions when left to our own devices. We get scared. We get excited. We get distracted. We get lazy. Do not make your financial success depend on your mood or your discipline in any given month. Automate everything. Set up automatic transfers from your checking account to your investment account on the same day every month, preferably right after you get paid. Set up automatic purchases of index funds within that investment account. Remove yourself from the decision-making process entirely. This turns good behavior into default behavior, and default behavior compounded over decades becomes extraordinary wealth. The closest thing to cheating in personal finance is setting up automated index fund investing and then ignoring it for 20 years. Now let's talk about something most people completely ignore until it is too late, and that ignorance costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetimes. I am talking about taxes and the incredible advantages the government gives you if you are smart enough to use them. Most people treat taxes like the weather. They complain about it, but they never do anything intelligent about it. Using the tax code to your advantage requires reading, planning, and taking action. That is apparently too much work for most people, so they voluntarily pay far more than necessary and wonder why building wealth feels so hard. Let me be very clear, if you ignore the tax advantages available to you, you are choosing to make your journey to 1 million slower, harder, and dumber than it needs to be. A 401k or traditional IRA lets you invest money before it gets taxed. That means more of your dollar goes to work immediately. Imagine two people investing $5,000 monthly for 10 years at 10% returns. One uses a regular taxable account. One uses a tax-deferred 401k after accounting for yearly taxes on gains in the taxable account. That investor ends with roughly $900,000. The 401k investor ends with over 1 million, same contributions, same returns, same time period, just different tax treatment. That extra 100,000 plus came from not being ignorant about taxes. Even better, many employers match your 401k contributions. They literally give you free money for saving your own money. If your employer matches 50% of your contributions up to 6% of salary, that is an instant 50% return on that portion of your money. There is no investment anywhere that guarantees you 50% immediately. Yet millions of people leave this money on the table because they want to spend it on something stupid instead. If you have employer matching and you are not contributing at least enough to get the full match, you are lighting free money on fire. I shouldn't have to explain this to adults, but here we are. A Roth IRA is the opposite structure. You pay taxes on the money now, then it grows tax-free forever. Why does this matter? If you are young with a relatively low income and low tax rate, paying taxes now is cheap. Then your money compounds for 30 or 40 years without ever paying another penny in taxes. I've personally seen people turn Roth IRAs into multi-million, dollar accounts over their lifetimes and never pay a dime in taxes on that growth. That is not luck. That is understanding the tax code and using it intelligently. The HSA Health Savings Account is one of the most powerful wealth-building tools in existence, and almost nobody uses it correctly. It has triple tax advantages. Your contributions are tax deductible. The money grows tax-free, and withdrawals for medical expenses are tax-free, triple advantage. But most people treat HSAs like checking accounts. They spend everything immediately, instead of investing it and letting it grow. That is like inheriting a goose that lays golden eggs and deciding to eat the goose. Now we need to address the inevitable part of building wealth that separates winners from losers. I am talking about market crashes, and how you respond to them will determine whether you build lasting wealth or stay broke forever. Every decade or so, sometimes more often, the market crashes. It drops 20%, 30%, sometimes 50% or more. It has happened repeatedly throughout history. It will happen repeatedly in your lifetime. It is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. If you want long-term stock market returns of 8, 10, 12%, you must accept short-term volatility of -20, -30, -50%. That is the deal. That is the price you pay for the returns. Most people claim they accept this deal, but their behavior during crashes proves they're lying to themselves. When the market crashes, most people panic. They see their portfolio drop 30% and they can't handle it psychologically. They sell at the bottom, locking in permanent losses. Then they wait on the sidelines until things feel safe again, which means they miss the recovery. Then they buy back in near the top just in time for the next crash. This is how the average investor dramatically underperforms the market, despite the market itself producing excellent long-term returns. The market does fine. The investors destroy themselves through emotional decisions. Here is what you need to understand. If you are building your first million, you are in the accumulation phase. You are buying, not selling. A market crash means you are buying the same high-quality assets at massive discounts. This is good for you. This is extraordinarily good for you. Imagine walking into a store where everything you need is suddenly 40% off. Would you panic? Would you run away screaming? Would you cry? Number, you'd buy more. You'd load up. You'd be thrilled. But in the stock market, when everything goes on sale, people do the opposite. They panic and sell. That is the difference between consumers and investors. Rational investors understand that market crashes are buying opportunities, not disasters. If you are dollar cost averaging every month, and you should be, then a market crash is your best friend. You are buying more shares for the same dollar amount. You are accumulating ownership of businesses at depressed prices. When the market recovers, and it always recovers eventually, you are going to be far wealthier than if the crash had never happened. I'll give you a personal example. During the 2008 financial crisis, the market dropped over 50%. It was terrifying. Everyone was predicting the end of capitalism, the end of America, the end of everything. But Warren and I kept buying. Actually, we increased our buying because everything was so cheap. Those investments made during the crash produced some of the best returns of our entire lives because we were buying quality businesses at fractions of their intrinsic value. The people who sold and ran away, they locked in massive losses and missed one of the greatest bull markets in history. The crash didn't hurt them. Their emotional reaction hurt them. Now we're going to address the part nobody wants to talk about, but everyone needs to hear. The psychological and identity shifts required to not just build wealth, but keep it. Because building your first million and keeping your first million require different mindsets. And most people who reach 7 figures don't understand this until they've squandered it. The mechanics of building wealth are simple. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference. Buy index funds, automate everything. Don't panic during crashes. Use tax advantages. Those are techniques. Techniques are easy to understand, but techniques are worthless if you don't have the psychology to implement them consistently for decades. Your first million is not a financial achievement. It is a psychological transformation. You have to become a different person. Someone who thinks differently about money, time, status, consumption, risk, and freedom than the average person. If you reach your first million but you are still thinking like you did when you had nothing, you are going to lose it. I've seen it happen dozens of times. Let me describe the identity traits of people who build and keep wealth. Traits you'll need to develop if you want lasting financial security. First, intellectual independence. Wealthy people think for themselves. They don't need consensus, validation, or permission to make financial decisions. They don't care what is fashionable or trendy. They operate on principles, not popularity. If you can't make decisions without the crowd cheering you on, you won't build wealth because the crowd is usually wrong. The crowd chases the latest fad. The crowd panics during crashes. The crowd inflates their lifestyle to impress strangers. If you think like the crowd, you get the crowd's results, which means broke. Second, thinking in terms of opportunity costs. Every dollar you spend has a cost beyond the price tag. A $500 purchase isn't just $500. It is $500 that won't compound into $2,000 or $3,000 over the next 20 years. Wealthy people see this automatically. They understand that spending today is killing future wealth. They still spend when it is worth it, but they never spend unconsciously. Poor people see money as something to spend. Wealthy people see money as something to deploy strategically. Third, being boring. Wealthy people have boring finances, automatic investments, low costs, minimal trading, no drama, no excitement. They've accepted that building wealth is not an adrenaline sport. If you need excitement, go skydiving. If you want wealth, embrace boring consistency. Fourth, intellectual humility. The market will humble you. Life will humble you. Overconfidence is extraordinarily expensive in investing. The wealthy don't pretend to know the future. They make decisions based on probabilities and long-term averages, not predictions and certainty. Fifth, extreme patience. Wealth is built over decades, not months or years. If you can't think in 20-year or 30-year time horizons, you can't think in wealth. Most people's time horizon is days or weeks. A few think in months. Almost nobody thinks in decades. That is why almost nobody becomes wealthy. Sixth, delayed gratification. You trade present comfort for future freedom. You choose compounding over consumption. This is the foundation of every fortune. People who need pleasure today rarely have wealth tomorrow. Finally, understanding that your real goal isn't money, it is autonomy. $1 million won't impress anyone, but it will buy you freedom from having to impress anyone. That is, stop chasing riches. Start chasing independence. You don't build your first million by accident. You don't build it by being clever or sophisticated or by finding some secret loophole the rest of the world hasn't discovered. You build it by becoming the kind of person who does boring things consistently for a very long time. The person who reaches $1 million is not the same person who started at zero. They evolved, they grew, they developed the traits I just described. And those traits, far more than the money itself, are what make them truly wealthy. Your first million is not the finish line. It is the starting line of a different kind of life. One where you have options, where you negotiate from strength, where fear doesn't drive your decisions. That is worth more than any number in your account. Build the wealth if you want, but build the character first, because without it, the wealth won't last. And even if it does last, it won't matter. I've lived through the Great Depression. I've watched brilliant people make fortunes and fools squander inheritances. And the one thing I know for certain after all these years is this: The path to wealth is simple. Not easy, but simple. And most people fail, not because the path is too difficult, but because they refuse to walk it. They want a shortcut. They want a hack. They want someone to tell them they can have wealth without sacrifice, without patience, without discipline. That person exists. But it is not me, and it is not anyone who has actually built lasting wealth. So there is your formula. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference. Buy index funds. Automate everything. Don't panic. Use tax advantages. Wait, that is it. That is everything you need to know. The rest is just noise. Now stop watching videos about building wealth and actually go build it. The information is useless without action. And action, as always, is where most people fail. Good luck. You are going to need it. Not because the path is hard, but because you are going to spend the next 20 years fighting your own worst instincts. But if you win that fight, your first million. End screen with channel subscribe button and related video suggestions.